Hi everyone. So chapter 4 focuses on constructivist theories. As I present, you'll see that there are some elements of these theories that may align with the science of reading, and there are many that do not. So what is constructivism? This is the idea that individuals actively construct their own knowledge. The learners are not passive participants, but instead they participate actively by connecting new knowledge to prior knowledge, which we can certainly see in practices that are aligned with the science of reading. Learning is natural, continual, and ongoing, and focused on three main components. First, that learning is internal and unobservable. Learning results from hypothesis testing, and learning results from making inferences. Constructivism explains how readers build meaning by interacting and interpreting text during the whole reading process. There are a few requirements of constructivism that include personalization of the topic. So the teacher aligns instruction to appeal to his or her students' personal interests. Students use a method of investigation, and work is geared toward the product. I found this quote very interesting because under this theory, learning is considered natural. So students would learn content and skills on a need-to-know basis. An example Dr. Thompson gave in her video was that you may teach the grapheme ch as it appears in the text. So instead of giving explicit sequential instruction for phonics skills, you would introduce it as it occurs naturally in the reading. This way of thinking would clearly be problematic as we look at it from the science of reading lens, and is not an effective way of teaching decoding. Here are the theories that we're going to cover today in this presentation. The first is inquiry theory. Many of us have heard of John Dewey. He was considered one of the first constructivists. He emphasized the idea of growth of the individual, the importance of the environment, and the role of the teacher. And this role follows the idea that the teacher is a facilitator and a guide, and most instruction is based on student problem solving and not necessarily direct instruction. Inquiry theory was designed to foster active citizens who participate and contribute to a democratic society. Therefore, cognitive skills like reasoning and decision-making are the major focus here. There's also an emphasis on that problem-based learning, as discussed before, that students must formulate a hypothesis, collect data, draw conclusions, and they should be able to reflect on those. Again, this line of practice would be problematic, especially when we're thinking about decoding instruction. We wouldn't want a student to hypothesize on phonics knowledge. So many of these components are used for social collaboration and problem-based learning, specifically in activities like literature circles. Literature circles are typically aligned with balanced literacy, which I don't have a lot of experience in, but I am curious if anyone has used literature circles in a way that can be tied to the science of reading practices. Next, we have schema theory. When I was reading about schema theory, I was constantly reminded of science of reading practices, especially on the comprehension side. So this is the idea that individuals align everything they know into knowledge structures called schemata. Learners must be active participants because their learning relies on his or her own schema. Differences in schemata influences learning. So the more elaborate someone's schemata is, the more easily he or she will be able to learn that new information. Dr. Thompson mentioned this, but it made me think of the study that Natalie Wexler pointed out in the knowledge gap as well as I was reading the chapter. So in short, the study divided students into 4 groups based on reading ability and prior knowledge of baseball. Students were asked to read a text about baseball and then perform certain tasks. Those who had a more elaborate schema for baseball performed better on these comprehension tasks despite their reading ability. So even poor readers were outperforming the higher readers that had less background knowledge. We know that there's a strong connection to the science of reading when we're talking about schema. developing a strong schema for a topic, vocabulary, etc. is crucial for our students. And I feel this can even apply to decoding instruction, because when we're using that explicit, sequential, comprehensive decoding instruction, we're constantly building upon that prior knowledge to attach new learning. At the bottom here, you'll see there's a quote from a teacher that I found interesting. In some cases, the children seem to confuse their real experiences with events in the story. This is definitely something I can relate to and I've seen in my classroom. So it is something that I think we need to be mindful of when we're teaching, and something that we are going to need to anticipate. And we'll have to figure out how we can have students separate their own knowledge from what they've just read when that is needed. Next, we have the transactional/reader response theory. And this is an extension of the schema theory. It's the idea that every reader brings a unique reading experience that's shaped by their individual background. Under this theory, there's two responses to text. One is efferent and is fact-based, typically used for informational text, but not necessarily exclusively. And then there's the aesthetic response, which are personally, emotionally based responses that are typically used for fictional texts, again, not exclusively. When I was reading this, it did actually make me think of the science of reading, because when we think of like a science of reading comprehension lesson plan, and I'm specifically thinking of the letters lesson plan, the first thing we want to do is set a purpose for reading. Why are we reading? And usually this purpose, it might be efferent, it might be aesthetic. Setting this purpose can help the reader learn more about the text, and it guides the student towards the appropriate type of responses we would be giving based on this text type. Next, we have psycholinguistic theory and whole language theory. These two theories were actually tackled together because they're so similar. Psycholinguistic theory is the idea that reading is primarily a language process. Readers rely on cueing systems, so that's where we get those cueing systems. It's based on syntactic, semantic, or graphophonic systems. So students make predictions about the text based on the knowledge in these areas. So under this theory, if their predictions are consistent with what the text says, that would lead to fluent reading. And then if predictions were inconsistent, that would result in laborious reading. And then the student would need to rely on their decoding almost as like a backup. Goodman even described this type of learning as a psycholinguistic guessing game, which I found very interesting. And by this, he meant that students can reconstruct thinking based on his or her knowledge of language, the world, and the text. Something I didn't realize is that Goodman actually coined the term miscue, and he perceived miscues as windows into the reader's mind. I do feel this can have a connection to the science of reading, maybe not in based on the exact definition that Goodman came up with. But if a student is reading a text and having a reading error or a graphophonic miscue, that can give us insight to the decoding skills a student may need further instruction in, or, if they're replacing words based on information they already know, it could be telling about their background knowledge. Psycholinguistic theory emphasizes authentic reading and use of text in natural language without the constraints of those phonetically based language or text. So no decodables. It also emphasizes that a child is a reader rather than someone who can become a reader. This suggests, again, that reading is a natural process similar to oral and is similar to the oral language development. The focus here on that whole language approach is on reading and writing workshops and various assessments that include portfolios, conferencing, and that are largely product-based. Whole language theory claims to promote a love for reading through the use of extensive classroom libraries and student choice. However, to have a love for reading, you have to know how to read. So when we're thinking about a science of reading connection, there's not many other than I feel it played a big role in the reading wars. Reading is not natural, and instruction must be explicit, sequential, systematic, comprehensive, and diagnostic. The last theory is the metacognitive theory, which is the process of thinking about one's own thinking. And there's some cluster skills here that the metacognitive theory focuses on, and that's main ideas, organizing materials, taking notes, etc. And these skills help students check their levels of understanding, planning activities, switching tasks, and more. This really made me think of the importance of executive functioning, as many of these are executive functioning skills. And we know that, based off of science of reading research, executive functioning skills are crucial for reading and reading comprehension. Poor readers have less metacognitive strategies than skilled readers. And metacognitive strategies involve self-monitoring and self-regulating to focus on the process of reading as well as the product of reading, which we know that the science of reading would support. The science of reading supports the use of metacognition to monitor comprehension. These strategies might include self-questioning, summarizing, clarifying, and predicting all throughout the reading process. A few takeaways here are that educators should be aware of the theories that are being used in their classroom, schools, and even districts, which leads me to my next point, is that educators should be aware of the theories or elements of theories that have been proven to be effective and that have shown to be ineffective in order to optimize learning. We really don't have a lot of time to waste using ineffective strategies in our classrooms, especially when our kids are already behind. And then lastly, there are elements from some of these constructivist theories that can align to the science of reading and be used effectively in our classrooms, such as elements from the schema theory and metacognitive theory. So I hope you were able to learn something today from my presentation, and thank you for listening.